every once in a while in a creative life, you hit a zeitgeist.
Yeah.
You know, you can have a critical success, you can have a financial success, you can have a personal success, but when all of those things coalesce and work, that's like that. If you're lucky, that happens once or twice in your lifetime.
You're listening to A Life Creative, real conversations with artists, designers, and other creatives about how they build, sustain, and evolve their careers.
Today on A Life Creative, I welcome Lucinda Scala Quinn, chef, writer, TV personality, and founder of Mad Hungry. From the early start serving for the likes of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, to heading up the food department at Martha Stewart Living, to building her own creative brand. Lucinda's story is all about trusting her instincts, evolving with purpose, and finding joy in her work itself. Lucinda's latest book, published in 2025, is titled Mother Sauce. Jody Williams, chef, author, and co-owner of New York City's celebrated Via Carota restaurant, says, Mother Sauce is a superb, inspiring cookbook drawn from generations of family wisdom. These recipes come from the heart and will find their way into your own repertoire. I'm happy to welcome Lucinda to the show today. This is a very special episode because, I've known you a long time, Lucinda, and I was really excited to have you on. Your stories are always funny, and I just love it. I just love everything about you and everything that you've done. And I think it's really apropos that you're coming on right before the Thanksgiving and just preparing for family and cooking for them. Do you have, in your latest book, Mother Sauce, do you have a recipe or a memory or that you love in that book?
Yes, well, Mel, we both know that we've done about 1,000 Thanksgivings for every 100 that everybody else has had, working together, creating Thanksgiving stories. But my favorite story here has to do with the Italians on my dad's side. You know, they had the whole artichokes. They would prepare them. If there was 50 people eating, there'd be 50 artichokes. They'd make the filling. They'd turn the artichoke. And my father was the first in the family to marry a non-Italian. So in walks this like tall, statuesque, blonde, blue-eyed woman, my mother, Rosemary. And it took her a minute to look at some of these traditions and go, yeah, that tastes good, but that's too much work. So here we were in the 50s, and, frozen food had become a deal. And she went into the frozen food section and she got a bunch of frozen artichokes, and she took all the ingredients from the stuffed artichokes, which was the breadcrumbs, the Romano cheese, the parsley, the garlic. And what she did is she laid all of those artichoke hearts down in casseroles, and then she would mix up what would be the stuffing and sort of tuck it in between the artichoke hearts, and then whisk together an olive oil, lemon juice, garlic, and pour that over and bake it. And that became on our table where my father's, Italianness kind of dominated our Thanksgiving, but my mother made it. So we really had American Thanksgiving, and like so many families of immigrant backgrounds, you have that one thing that is your thing.
Yes.
So the baked artichokes, which is in the Mother Sauce cookbook, is that, and it's beloved. I've published it before. It's just that thing that when you go downstairs on the morning after Thanksgiving, if it's me or any of my brothers, we're sneaking in to try to be the first person to get those leftovers.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay, I need to try that. One other question about Thanksgiving is cranberry sauce. Did you grow up with the log from the can, or did you have the mixed version?
I have to say that I'm pro log from a can, although we didn't have that. My mom made them. My mother doggedly stuck to homemade cooking.
Yeah.
She wasn't a foodie or fancy or anything, but at an era where, 50s housewives, convenience was being foisted upon them, she used real ingredients and cooked them simply. And
That's
really was the
amazing.
biggest inspiration for me that way. I find that all my friends, and probably you too, Mel, whatever their background is, if there's a Thanksgiving with the mashed potatoes and the turkey, there's always that one side. Do you have a side from your Filipino heritage that is always on the table?
Every holiday, every birthday, anniversary, you have to have pancit, which is a noodle, and because it's good luck. So my mom will always make that as the side dish to it. And in recent years, we've kind of, we all have to say, like, do we really love turkey? We've been replacing it with pork tenderloin, or we've been replacing it with
racy.
Yeah. yeah. I know the idea of that kind of like puts people in a spin, right? Not to have the traditional things, but pancit is the one thing that we do.
Amazing. And that's true of Mexican Americans, Korean Americans, Chinese Americans. Everybody, I find, no matter how much they're in the American Thanksgiving, there's some little thing that is about their own heritage.
Yeah, and a green bean casserole sometimes isn't my thing, so.
Yeah, I would have to deconstruct that.
and
I probably have.
If there's one person that could, it would be you. We've known each other for a long time. Through our Martha Stewart Living days. And before that, I know you were at television. But I want to get to how you became who you are from a young age. You spoke about your mom as being a really big influence, but where are you from?
I was born in Canada. I was born in Ontario, Canada. I was raised in Detroit, and therein starts my food journey because my family moved us across the country from Detroit to Connecticut at the really exquisitely awkward time of halfway through the first semester of 10th grade.
Oh my God.
So I was just a miserable young lady who was on a one-way trip to nowhere, and a really wonderful guidance counselor got me into the office and was like, you want to be a good girl or a bad girl? And I kind of wanted to, he got to a sore spot. Anyway, he got me in touch with a...
Do you remember his name?
Yes, Bob Silverstone. If you happen to be listening to this, you saved my life. And he put me in a work-study program, which meant I could do high school until 1 o'clock or noon or 1 o'clock, and then I could go work. And he said, is there anything you can do? And I said, well, I can cook. Because I'd come from this big Italian family where I was with the aunts and the grandmothers and my own mother, and so he got me it just so happened at a moment in time in history, 1974, he got me a starting job, not like today where you can become a superstar in 6 months, where I chopped onions for 6 months.
Were you a bad teenager before that? Like, was he sort of?
I was just like having too much fun for a young girl at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay. I get it.
And I had come from
we would have been friends, by the way.
Yeah, and it, and there wasn't like extreme trouble, but I suppose there maybe could have been. But what happened is that very first day on the job, that cooking job, where I was working with a Mexican American, I was working with a kind of Julia Child-esque woman named Dolly Dady, who was this larger than life woman in 1974, before there was a really big evolved food scene, and I took to it instantly, and I loved it, and I have honestly never looked back, and that was a long time ago.
So he just saw something in you. He just really...
I just think that he was one of those guys who loved his work and wanted to mentor young people. And it's not that he saw that I had any particular skill as much as he wanted to find out what it was so that he could begin to cultivate it. Because as we know, and I'm the mother of 3 sons, traditional education is not that a lot of people are not cut out for that. In Europe and in times past, there was apprentice opportunities and all kinds of stuff like this. But
sort of try before you buy kind of idea, just to know if you like it.
There's not a way. Some people can't learn in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
Some people need to use their hands, and I think so many young people go off the rails that way. So I'm just so fortunate that it happened, and it was both like productive, creative, delicious, nourishing. It was at the time of the ascent of food in America as something more than either regional American or quotes continental cuisine.
Right.
So
the birth of balsamic vinegar that we
and goat cheese
and silver palate.
Yeah, and it was just a little bit before that, and Julia Child's Mastering the Arts of French Cooking had come out, and everybody was cooking through that, and it was the dawn of a new time. Now everything's fetishized in food, but back then it wasn't like that.
Yeah. I remember the first time you had sushi, the first time you had French food.
I mean, we made omelets to order at this place, and that was unbelievable. We had quiche. We always had omelets, quiche, and then one main dish, which would be like chicken marengo or something like that. And we had because this was Westport, Connecticut, so there was an incredible group of a creative class of people that worked in the city, musicians, artists, painters, actors, and they frequented this place. So
some famous people, as I recall.
Oh yes, a lot of famous people, a lot of people who at the time I didn't really know, but like Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was one of our customers. Dorothy Rogers, I worked for her. She was Richard Rogers' wife of Rogers and Hammerstein, and Dorothy was like an early Martha Stewart type. She was like a doyenne of cooking and whatnot, and that was my first catering job actually when I was 15 was for Dorothy Rogers.
And Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward?
Joanne Woodward and Joanne's mother. They were customers, and they
You
were
have to tell this
wonderful.
story.
I was working there, and the Newman family was in there for lunch, and I spilled milk all over Paul Newman by accident. It just slid off the tray, and I just picked up a napkin and started kind of wiping his face embarrassingly, and he was nonplussed. And then soon after that, he hired Bon Appetit was what it's called, to do a catering job. And he said, I want the girl who spilled the milk on
He
me.
actually remembered you.
Yes. And I don't know what, again, because he also told me another thing at one of our encounters when I was down about something. And I relayed to him that a young girl in high school had said, I only had the work I had because I was lucky. And he said, kid, there's an art to being lucky. And that was a pivotal thing for me, too, because it told me early on that one puts themselves in a situation where luck can intersect with whatever they have to give. And that's been a big thing for me. Wow. Also, my next job after that was June Havoc owned the restaurant, and she was Gypsy Rose Lee's sister. And that was in Wilton, Connecticut. And that was another little gourmet shop. But these were formidable characters. I still have photographs of me with June Havoc when I was like 16 years old. And creative characters and authentic humans.
So you, after, you're working all throughout high school, you seem like you're working.
Yes.
And then
Once I started working, I
didn't
adored
stop.
it. I didn't stop. And it wasn't work. I just loved it.
Yeah.
It was a great thing I recommend for anybody who moves across the country at a young age and doesn't know what to do with yourself. Like, try to get a job that you like, because you then begin to feel some sense of like belonging, which is important, because it's brutal, as we know, in high school.
You decided to go to college.
Yeah, I did.
And you went to Amherst?
No, I couldn't have got into Amherst. But I did get into Hampshire College,
Okay,
which
that's
was
right.
of the 5 colleges, the kind of crazy experimental. And the beautiful thing about the 5 colleges, you can take classes at either of them: Holyoke, Smith, Amherst, UMass.
I see.
So at Amherst, I took history. At UMass, I took music. At Smith, I took chemistry. But I was a Hampshire student, where you kind of was perfect for me. You invent your own curriculum.
Are you a smarty pants? No.
I have intuitive emotional intelligence. I never had great grades. I had not good. I've never been like on the math science side of things.
Right.
Which
is ironic in cooking.
In cooking,
in
that's
chemistry,
true.
and
I learned it the gut way. I was not nerdy that way. I was a reader, an artistic type. My mother was a painter. She was an antique dealer. I was around the arts a lot growing up. She took us in Detroit. We went to the Detroit Institute of the Arts. We went downtown to like the Greek festivals. We immersed ourselves in the culture of Detroit, and she was like that. I'll never forget when we moved to Connecticut. She took a class with Florence Lynn, who was a noted cookbook author at the time, and she would come home and like try to make dumplings. Not like fancy. She was just always curious, and that had a big rub off on me.
Well, something that I didn't know is that you studied film and photography.
Yes, I did. So when I worked, I took classes at this place called Silver Mine in Norwalk, Connecticut. Photography. I always loved photography, and always would shoot, always take photographs. My parents were really encouraging of that. And so when I went to Hampshire, I studied film photography, again, in a very, I love this word, it really, fecund, which means just like so fertile, this environment of professors, Elaine Mays, Jerry Liebling. These are artists who have their work in the Met, and yet they were up at this little experimental college reinventing the way people learn. Tom Jocelyn, a noted filmmaker. We learned differently there. We created our own projects, and also I was very interested in writing, and I worked with a wonderful writer named Nina Payne, and you work towards the senior thesis, and it just so happens that senior thesis, which was called 5 Sisters from Rome, New York, about my great aunts, the Italians, was the seed for this 8th cookbook I just made all these years later.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Oh, so after college, you decided to go to New York.
Go to New York, work in film and photography. My brother
sort of just freelancing your way through.
Yeah, my brother was a Broadway dancer at the time, and so I stayed with him. And again,
but not cooking.
Well,
at all in the beginning?
Very quickly, I started cooking again, even though I wasn't going to, because there was opportunity. People started hiring me and I'd be like, no, I'm in film and photography. But then I just realized that I had something young that I had learned early, and that I was getting hired for it. And again, don't forget, Yellowfinger, the Quilted Giraffe, all of these places were just becoming like Ooh, it was like food was on the ascent. Now we're at like, late 70s, early 80s. And it really was kind of a men's world in a sense. But I also started food writing, and I was lucky I got published early. And I realized how much I loved to write as well as cook. And also knew because I had been cooking on a line earlier, that I didn't want to work in restaurants. I knew that.
Yeah. But you were saying that you actually cooked as a PA on a shoot, on a film?
A friend of mine asked, no, when I was being a PA on a film, a friend of mine who worked for a wealthy, big fancy pants asked me said the chef had quit and would I come in and do the job? And I was like, no, I don't cook anymore. I'm going to work in film. And she begged me and I went, and then those people offered me an amazing job, which again, I was able to cook, but then I had time to write, and that's when I got published. And that was right around the time I ended up meeting my husband and getting pregnant, and writing and cooking suited that life that I found myself in.
You say that so casually that you started writing about food and then you got published. How does that work? Was it sort of a cold call? Like I wrote this thing. Did you just call the newspaper?
Working for the fancy people that only needed me to make lunch for them 3 days a week, I was in this kitchen in this brownstone on the Upper East Side. And so I was a big reader. And there was an amazing cookbook shop that opened on Lexington Avenue in the 90s called Kitchen Arts and Letters by a man named Knock Waxman. It's still there. I was just there last week. It's got periodicals, out of print, modern. It was such a place of congregation.
Yeah.
So I would go up there and I would buy stuff, and I would just have while I was doing my paid cooking job, I was always reading, and I was accumulating recipes in a book, and I just loved food writing. I loved the early writers. So not like today. I mean, today you just publish, and maybe you can just publish. You don't have to go top down through some editor. It's so democratized. It breeds a lot of mediocrity, but there's also incredible opportunity if you have. We've all seen it in all of our fields. To self-publish, even just like Substack and like all these ways you can do that. Back then you had to write to like the food editor of the Daily News or the New York Times, and you'd hope that it would bubble up. I just did that like crazy.
And it worked.
And then one day, because I wrote an article called Rita and Guac, and it was about the perfect partners.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, we're in like 1983, and they loved it, and they bought the article, and it was printed.
Did you know what to charge, what the rates were?
No. I didn't care. I just wanted to write.
You just wanted to write.
I wanted to write, and I didn't even know that being published was a thing in a magazine, so to speak.
Yeah.
And from there, that's what happened. I just kept doing it, but I didn't get it took me years to have any note of anything.
Well, how do you find, you want to write these articles on food. Do you just sort of have the ideas in your head? Like, you know what, I want to do an article on appetizers, or do you just go through your daily life and you're like, you know what, that would be a really interesting story to tell, or
totally.
Yeah.
I've been a lifelong reader. It really saved me when I was young. I've always loved to read. I've always noticed when food becomes a character in a book or a film, like Babette's Feast or something like that. Yes, and in fact, that's what made me, I think, successful as an editor, was because I was always noticing like the space in between the words or the activities or the produce, or that really defined what that story was and what made it interesting. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that comes from just like time spent doing your work, like slow and steady, succumbing to your own curiosity and building on it.
Well, like you also said, that you sort of kept this catalog of recipes, and you have these things on the burners all the time.
Always.
You're just
and not knowing why, and
Yeah.
ending up in different places. Like, for example, when my children, this is getting ahead a little bit, but when my children were young and I wasn't working in food, I maybe one or two kids at that point, I took a job in the library of the children's school, unpaid, because I wanted to be around books in a way that I never had. I'd been around books as a reader in a library, but never as a librarian. And I kept thinking when I was there, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? And it's not until I look back that I understand why I did a lot of different things that I did.
Yeah. You spoke about your mom being a huge influence, and I think that the idea of the,
Just
slow food and fast food.
When you said that, something just popped into my head.
Oh, really?
So at one point, my parents lived in Massachusetts, and I had just gotten out of college, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and I started catering around the town where my mom was. And one of the first catering jobs I got was for Joan Kennedy.
Really?
Not when she was married to Ted Kennedy.
Okay.
When she was married to the doctor.
Okay.
And I remember she wanted to have these Chinese noodles, which was like fine. There was no problem. My mom was like, "Don't worry, I'll help you." And this almost is like, sounds like it's not true, but it's really true. That medication called Motrin had just come out, which is like
The ibuprofen.
yeah,
basically.
it had just come out. And I remember it was that time of a
remember
month,
that.
and I had to work, and my mother was like, "Oh, we should try one of these." And I've always been loopy on any medication, and I got so loopy. And in the middle of the dinner party, I was in the kitchen draining the noodles, and they all fell into the sink, and I was like, with my hands like pulling the noodles up, and Ms. Kennedy came in and looked at me, and she was kind of a little bit, not 100% herself. And we just burst out laughing. And I was like, I can't believe I'm catering a Kennedy event. And I just dropped the noodles. And then another thing happened where my mother, she would help me at my catering jobs.
Oh, that's so cute.
And one time she accidentally took the dog medicine that was out with her own pills, like her own, like just vitamins or whatever. She took the dog medicine when I was like, "Mom, you're helping me with this job. You took the dog tranquilizer or whatever," and we laughed so
no, I
hard.
didn't.
So she was just game. She didn't know what she was doing. I now remember too, on one of those jobs, I worked for this woman named Corey Gibbs, and Gibbs was a big gas station up there. And my mother had this incredible collection of Dansk, which was turquoise, which I didn't realize how cool it was at the time. And I used it to cook everything, and I took it to the Gibbs house, and I was like such a loser teenager. I just left the dishes there, and they kept calling it, "Don't you want to get your pans back?" And I was like, "Oh, it's okay." And I think back, where is that collection of turquoise Dansk pots?
You met your husband.
I did, yes.
Who is a well-known DJ.
Yeah.
And where did you guys meet?
We met because one of my college roommates was one of those go-getters who had a job before we got out of college. And so she was a publicist at WABC, and he was a disc jockey on the radio at the time called WPLJ, which was a big rock and roll station.
Tony Pig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just happened to meet, and we were both otherwise involved, but we saw each other at all these places all over New York, and had like an really instant, like soul.
Just by chance, you would see each other.
Yeah, that happens a lot when you open up yourself, and we saw each other.
Which is always amazing me in like back then, probably 8 million people in New York City.
Yes.
That
we would see each other at like the film forum for a weird film, or like one time I saw him at Madras Woodlands, which was a South Indian restaurant. We were just like, we were meant to be. I know that now 40 years later. At the time I didn't, because I had another boyfriend, and he was older than me. It was a mess. But I took the road less taken, and it worked out for me.
And what did you sort of learn from being with somebody that was famous, at the time?
Oh, what was great is that he really didn't like fame, and he didn't trust fame. He loved music. He loved his work. But he used to say that if someone likes you because you're famous, it's not real. And so he taught me very early on about the illusory nature of fame, which was such a gift. And in fact, he was behind the scenes. He was on the radio, but I never forget when MTV came on, they wanted him to go, and he's like, "No, I'm not going to lose my anonymity unless I'm like, got some serum for a disease or something. Like, I'm not doing that." So he really taught me that, every single job and thing that humans do is on an equal par humanly. I learned that really early on, which was great, because I went on to I already had known, some famous people, but I went on to work around a lot of famous people. And I think one of the reasons I was able to do that was because I really learned from him. In fact, one of the reasons I went and started working at Martha Stewart is he had this long, famous career, and he just got tired of that. I want to do what you do. Like, I want to cook. I want in on some of that.
Right. Right.
Just a quick pause in the show to ask a favor. Please subscribe, like, and share. It really makes a difference in helping others to find us. Thanks for listening, and if you have any suggestions, you can reach us through our website, alivecreativepod.com, or find us on social. Now back to the episode.
So let's talk about the Martha years, because we on our prep call we talked about it, that you started at television.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember my first month I had to go to TV before I started a magazine, because they were doing the Christmas special.
Right.
And it was...
Those were like nothing
Oh
else.
my gosh, it was a crazy amount of production, and there's celebrities, and there's
yeah.
film crews.
Tony Bennett was there one day.
Tony Bennett, yeah. And I remember he sang.
Yes.
And we all stood there, and it was one take.
I remember he said to me, "Do I look too oily?" And I was like, "Do I look too oily?" Because we were both Italian, and it was hot. He made his face. Oh my God.
It was, and I was like, this is so crazy how quickly production is here.
Yeah, and also...
And the big difference between the magazine and I think
Oh, yes,
TV.
because it was so fast. It was, so we're talking about Martha Stewart Living television, which in its day was very innovative in the sense that like how-to television that also mixed celebrity, and every single person I ever revered in food and in culture, like artists, like artisans, and came through. Martha's, one of her chief skills was just executing on her curiosity, and bringing in so many interesting people and working with so many interesting people
who felt the same way, that they wanted to bring this out, like her vision or whatever,
Yeah, if there's one thing I wish Martha would talk more about, it is that included in her multiple skills, of which we know what they are, and it's real. Another skill of hers was to identify and bring together really unusual, talented people.
Absolutely agree.
And I think you and I would both say that,
Yeah.
I mean, I could count right now 10 people that had a massive impact on my life, my creative life.
Yeah.
I was a cook and a recipe writer, and I was I was making books at that point, but then I worked with, art directors and prop stylists and writers and editors and production managers, all of whom taught me their specific skill set, which is inside me, like a little piece of it's inside me in every job I do now.
Yeah.
I might not know why something isn't working, but I know if it's not working.
I feel the same.
I know, I just have it. I get goosebumps saying this because there were so many talented people, and Martha would give any of those people, and I was one of them, in a non-linear way, a chance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And
a
that
voice.
was such a huge skill of hers that also, frankly, helped make the brand what it became.
Yeah. Yeah. And she let you bring your family traditions,
Yeah. She was curious.
She let you bring something new that you discovered. I love that aspect of it.
Yep.
How did you get that job?
Well, again, going back to my famous husband who didn't want to deal with it anymore, he was like, he had started working in more voiceovers, and he really didn't want to work, in that way. And I was like, well, let me see if I can get the big job. Because we were at this point a family of 5 in New York City, and, living, very much what used to be a way you could live in New York City, like, middle class life where you didn't have a ton of money, but your kids went to public school. And so I asked him I said, look, let me just see if I can get a big job, then you could, do less. So I wrote a letter to Gourmet Magazine, Ruth Reichel, and I wrote a letter to Martha Stewart at Martha Stewart Living. And I heard back from both of them, which is strange. Because when you think about it, there must have been like a big pile. But then on the inside, you realize that like it's always the thing to have. There's always problems to be solved in a creative company like that. Like, you always need stories. You always need content. You always need people.
But at that point, though, if they saw your name, they knew that you were writing. They knew.
I was not really.
No?
I mean, they might have saw when they saw my resume, but I was by no means known.
Okay.
Absolutely not. The opportunity at Gourmet was for 3 months for somebody who was going on maternity leave, and I thought that was like the ultimate for me. But then I got a call from the Martha people, and I went there, and then it just turned out that I decided to go with this other thing, which ended up being like the biggest pivot in my career because of the opportunities that opened up to me over time, led by Martha, and then encouraged and sometimes discouraged by my colleagues. And still we're in like 2001, and this is still an early time. I mean, you had Chez Panisse.
This is still
in
PBS.
California.
This
is just still an early time in the evolution of food and what people knew about food and the idea of produce and growers
slow
and
food,
chefs and slow food and
farm to table,
everything. It's still early days.
Yeah.
And Martha really was pioneering in that sense. And then she would get so excited when we would find new ways or new people or new things or, just come up with new ideas. She was just a sponge and wanted to do it. And of course, herself had tons of ideas to execute on.
What was your first week like?
It was very challenging. Because I didn't know how...
We've talked about this off camera, and we all have our stories, but, I
didn't know how things worked.
Yeah.
And I came from all brothers, all sons, a husband, a powerful father, and my mother was just an amazing person. But I didn't have a lot of females in my life, and I was actually looking forward to getting to work with a lot of females. And what I didn't realize, again, back at that time, I think it's very different now, it was a little dog eat dog.
Yeah.
Or, bitch eat bitch, maybe. I mean, it was like...
Well, it's that vocabulary that
we were all given chances, but like we were all fighting for recognition. And so there was a lot, and then it's an unusual thing when you're in a company where you have a corporation, but then you have a figurehead who's one person. So you're trying to like...
Appease everyone. Yeah, a lot of creative heads.
A lot of creative heads.
A lot of opinions. And in matters of taste, there's no dispute, really, because that first week we had 3 very internationally famous French chefs come up. Did you have to find these people?
They were already booked, actually.
Okay.
But they were, as I told the people who in the team who didn't know, I was like, it's like Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson are all coming, and they were all chefs from France, and it was quite a scene. I thought I could just do things the way I should have done them, and then I was told that like maybe it should have been done differently, and then there was this big to do, and I was like, whoa, I don't know if I can handle this. But the day came out really well. In the middle of the day, I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I might just not have to.
But you stuck to your guns.
But I stuck to my guns, and was very honest about my opinion about how I thought things would work, both to my colleagues and to Martha. And it ended up working out. And then I said, you know what, I'll give this a go. And I think that process gave me the opportunity to, for Martha to know I really, I meant business. Like I wasn't gonna soft pedal how I felt.
Yeah.
And she certainly, we all knew she wasn't.
Yeah.
And that would make some people wither. And I don't judge that because, there are times that we all wither. But I ended up establishing pretty early on like a pretty good working relationship. She knew she was going to get a straight talk
Answer.
from me, and I knew exactly that she wasn't good. You knew exactly where she stood too.
Yeah.
And that ended up being a formula that worked for us because I was running food TV then, but then ultimately I ended up running the magazine and all of food for Martha for 15 years.
And that was
10 years.
2001?
2001 to 2004, I was at TV. 2004, I went to New York to the magazine, and then very quickly, our company was, we had merchandising.
I think we actually became editorial directors at about the same
same time in New York.
Yep. And it was, so
it was
a big transition.
You're in a post 9/11 New York.
Yeah.
You're still in a very, in a growing, a time when New York had a lot of just growth in food and culture and style.
Yeah. And competition.
And competition was starting to really come on.
Publications.
Yep.
People were copying us.
Oh my goodness.
The pressure for that was really, really.
Oh yes. And I learned then something important about a creative life is it's like there's very few new ideas. Ideas are built on ideas. And it's really easy when you see that you're copied or an idea is copied or something original is copied and you think, you could get upset about it, but really that's what we all build on. So I learned early on, like, okay, just think up a new idea.
It's a version of
or you know what, or just go in a different direction. Like, oh, this is an opportunity to just think up something new.
Yeah. So that time, when you were at Martha, you eventually headed up the food department at Martha. And there is one story that I remember that you guys let me do, and it was a Filipino entertaining story with Shira Bakar. And afterward,
another. Going back to the incredible cooks that worked for us.
Yes,
with us. Like at one point there were like 19 cooks in our kitchen. Also talented. Shira Bakar, had one Filipino parent.
Yeah.
She was raised in Oklahoma, went to NYU, amazing chef. And so this is what would get me excited. So she had and I loved the Filipino food that I knew, but she had this background. Our home editor had this background. So to me...
And I think Nicholas Anderson was the craft editor who was Filipino.
And then putting that together into a story that showed basically an immigrant community in America, the bones and roots of their food. But elevated ever so slightly into something that like anybody could enjoy or anybody could taste. And Martha, again, gave us that opportunity.
Oh my God, I was so nervous presenting that to all of you. I remember in the conference room, I had these like color Xeroxes from a trip, and I'm like, I think I'd like to do an entertaining story with, and then I sort of explained it all, and then she just is like, okay. And then I'm like, oh. And then after we shot it, you said the sweetest thing, and I'll never ever forget this. And I'm gonna get emotional because you said, "Wow, it's beautiful." And I was just like, "Oh my God!" It was really, really one of those things. Anyway,
and we had so many of those times, And again, let me put it this way: back at TV, our boss, and this is not something that is, everyone knows it. She had to take a little
break
and go somewhere, and we had this television studio, and we had this little magazine called Everyday Food, so we put on a show and we made a TV show. That was the PBS Everyday Food TV show. So there was the resources and the instinct and the ability to really invent and create, and again, that came with its ups, it came with its downs, but in the end, looking back, try to find places to put yourself where you get to have. Nowadays it's rough. There's so many isolated ways that people work, and I think back of those collaborative times when we had those kind of brutal pitch meetings where you had to put yourself out on the table, and you knew that some people were laughing at you, some people were laughing with you, some people were laughing, but at the same time it really taught you to articulate your voice.
What was your favorite story?
And I had this idea it came to me called modern master pizzas. And I wanted to do pizzas that were based off iconic paintings. And, like Picasso or, so I wanted to blend I never was really style first. Like everything had to have flavor and taste. Yes. And a lot of you guys would want to do stuff that was just style. Yes. And I'd be like, well, that's not going to necessarily.
But it's pretty.
But it's pretty. And I was like, yeah, but that's not really going to taste good. And
but you guys were also told that Martha could come in at any point during a shoot and take taste something, right?
Everything was real. And I was allied with her on that. I thought of our customer, any part of this country who didn't have 25 pans, who didn't have, who didn't have a team working with them. I wanted it to work. But this modern masterpieces, and it worked. And I got to sit there like in a laboratory in our test kitchen, getting the doughs right, making the oh gosh, it was just such a fun thing. And in the end, we shot 7 different iconic pieces of art as pizzas. I was able to, see that.
Did ham and pineapple?
No, there wasn't ham and pineapple.
The Don Ho of pizzas?
For instance, Mondrian was yellow tomato sauce and red tomato sauce in color blocking on a rectangular pizza.
I kind of love that.
Yeah, the Picasso was a sort of cubist design using mushrooms and scallions, and so it was just, to me, that was culminated everything that we ever did. But I also have so many favorite stories that weren't mine that I was a part of. I kept we had this cobblers and crisps and
yes.
And I remember when we were pitching that, I kept thinking lions and tigers and bears, because I was a lot of the time when you would pitch a story, if you had a headline, then you could convince editors and creative directors
because it rhymed, or
it was cobblers and crisps and whatever, and they could get their head around it, because there were so many kind of cockamamie things you wanted to pitch that were unique, and it was the job of our editors and our creative directors to say, yeah, hey, but does the customer want that? Is this, you can't just go too out there. There's this inventing things that people don't know that they're going to love, and then there's giving people stuff, and then we enter the era, of course, of SEO, and the era
focus
of
groups,
and
what's selling, competition,
and then the internet is on the rise, and blogging is on the rise, and you're so busy. I was so busy involved in books and merchandising and magazines that
appeasing all that,
and also maybe not noticing as early as I would have liked the power of the digital media space.
Yeah,
and
the double-edged sword.
Yeah,
of that.
I'll never forget having, because I had a radio show on Sirius XM at one point, and I remember having Eater which was brand new, Serious Eats, and one other traditional legacy media person. And there was like a thing that went down where, like, well, we don't have to wait around for some top-down editor to decide whether or not our stuff can happen,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so to watch the bubbling up of what we now know, that now is on steroids in America.
Absolutely.
Or in the world, I should say. But to be at the beginning of that, and to watch legacy media have a hard time in many ways pivoting, and some people did it well, some people didn't, but we can see by what's gone that didn't make it, that didn't pivot fast enough, and maybe everything would have been, because stuff always changes. And
to date, 8 books.
Yeah, I have
and then
8
these books, you've been working on Mad Hungry, the very first one, which I love. Is you did that you were working on that a long time before.
Well, the
weren't
Mad
you?
Hungry book was the first. So I actually published 3 books before the Mad Hungry book. The great thing for me, luckily, was I had a cookbook published before I came to my Martha job. And when
Right.
you have a contract frequently with your publisher, they have a right to first refusal on your next book.
Is that right?
Yeah. So when I got to Martha, part of the deal was, hey, if I write another book, it's going to be with my publisher.
Right.
And I, at that point, I had no sense of wanting to do something for myself. I liked doing it like on the side, and I really enjoyed being behind the scenes with a big creative team working with Martha. I never had any aspiration that I wanted to do what Martha did. I truly never did. And
This sideline book, FYI, is 90,000 copies sold.
well, that was that book. Yes. The other ones were smaller books, but they built up, and then I don't know, just things evolve. If you just keep doing what you love, things evolve. And then the Mad Hungry book was my 4th book. Was it my 4th book? Yeah, 4th book. And the other ones were smaller, kind of quiet, no big deal. And this was about the experience I had having brothers and sons and having this everyday need of this. It wasn't like I was just trying to write about guys. It was that was my life.
Right.
And what it
Feeling this appetite.
and what it
that was-
came with was like dawn to dusk, and I realized I could be like tortured by this demand, or it could use it as a prism through which to see the world. And I always knew I wanted to do what my mom did, which was cook fresh food for me and my family. I still do it today. Then the idea came like writing this book about that experience. And for the longest time, I just in my head called it the Man Book. And I did it at nights, on the weekends, in the mornings before going to work. It had nothing to do with my Martha. The way I pictured it was like at Martha, we had like beautiful wedding cakes and everything was perfect and glorious. And at home, my life was kind of a nice shambles. Like everything was just like catch as catch can, make it affordable, repurpose leftovers. And it was that complete opposite world that I captured in Mad Hungry.
Yeah.
And that hit the zeitgeist because that came out in 2009, right when we had a financial crash. So a lot of men had lost their jobs, were at home cooking. We were talking about beans. We were talking about things that weren't very like, pizzazzy, like leftovers and and affordable ways to eat. And that really hit him. Every once in a while in a creative life, you hit a zeitgeist.
Yeah.
You can have a critical success, you can have a financial success, you can have a personal success, but when all of those things coalesce and work, that's like that. If you're lucky, that happens once or twice in your lifetime. And that particular book, that happened.
Oh my gosh.
And I couldn't have anticipated it because I was just doing what I did.
But then you kept going. I mean, eight books on that with that title to begin with. So this brand started happening.
Yeah. So then the Mad Hungry is a trilogy of 3 books, which is the life cycle of a family. So it started. One was published in 2009 called Mad Hungry Feeding Men and Boys, and then Mad Hungry Cravings was in 2013, and Mad Hungry Family was in 2016, and it was basically like the early life of a family. Mad Hungry Cravings was about when your family in New York City goes out into the world and they want to order pizza and then Thai food and whatever, and how do you keep them home and keep them nourished. And then Mad Hungry Family is it all comes around. They're cooking too. We're cooking together. This is the culmination. It's basically like proof of concept.
Yeah.
And in that period of time, that gave birth to a television show, which was an adjunct to the book. But at that point, the Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia folks had embraced it, produced it, and so it was.
Were you nervous to be in front of
all of
it? Like we're also used to, as editors at the magazines, we're behind the scenes. I mean, we had to do a little bit in 2004, 2005, but to be all of a sudden in front of the camera,
Well, I had that experience with Everyday Food where I was with a cast of 5.
Right.
So that was hard. We all learned that together. Because the most natural thing in the world is the hardest thing on camera, which is being yourself.
The one thing I want to talk about is QVC, because it's this thing that we grew up with.
QVC is obviously a home shopping network. They're all over the world in different places. America's the biggest market. I knew about it because I actually had I had gotten training to go on with the Everyday Food Cookbook in my Martha days. Cut to me publishing my own books, the Mad Hungry books, through my publisher. They got me on, back in the day, you could really sell cookbooks on QVC. So
And the setup for that is just like a kitchen and you're actually cooking, or is it?
There's recipes from your book, and you're with a host, and you're taught, walking through, why with the book. And that first Mad Hungry book did very well at QVC. Again, it was right place, right time, different time. And then the second Mad Hungry book came on, and around that time, I had a television show, and on that television show, I had been using this favored tool of mine called a spurtle. And
I have one right here,
yes,
so that everyone can see it.
It's kind of like an elongated
really beautiful
wooden spoon spatula thing. And I had bought this tool from a carver, and I was using it a lot. And then it got noticed on the TV program. People started writing me. We put up the name of the carver, and then after a while, and that was a very nice piece, because he used cherry wood, and it was I think at the time $60 or something. And then he was just after a year no more, and so we decided to make our own.
He got overwhelmed.
Yes. Oh. So then we decided to make our own spurtles.
Okay.
And we did a 2-piece set, which was the large and the small. And then when I was doing my book launch, the second Mad Hungry, we asked if we could sell the spurtle, and they were like, nobody buys wood, and no one knows what a spurtle is.
They actually said no one buys wood.
Because nobody was buying wood, And so I don't know how I convinced them, or how they became convinced to give me a shot. And we made a small amount of them, and they sold out right away, in 3 minutes. How they determine success is dollars per minute. So the dollars per minute were probably
27
something crazy. It was, and I was too naive. I didn't understand the business, and busy, frankly, to understand what that meant. But that launched our business. Yeah. At the time, I was still affiliated with Martha, and things at that point became too much.
Everything was changing.
This big job at Martha, a family that was terribly important to me, a publishing career, a TV career, radio, and
publishing was transition. It was really changing.
But it was changing.
World.
But I was still writing books on the side,
yeah.
On the weekends and at night, and I became aware of the fact that it was just way too much. Plus, I started to see that things were going to probably change at the Martha Stewart Living the media company, which in fact they did very soon after it was sold. Martha sold it and has evolved it in many different interesting ways since. But that was the time for me. Right before that happened, I decided, okay, it's time. And plus, at this point, I started noticing people of my kids' age all starting to create their own businesses
on social media.
They didn't have to go through corporations for 10 years. People could get a seat at the table. At that time, I was 57. I just looked around and I was like, I want to try that. I want to do it my own way. And so I resigned amicably from my wonderful Martha job, and right away incorporated Mad Hungry into LSQ & Sons is our company, and Mad Hungry is our first brand that we.
We'll talk about that a little bit, because you decided to go into business with your son.
Yeah, I had decided to do this, and then I left I resigned it in September, and then my son said a little while later, and he had a really nice job working at Condé Nast in editorial there, and he was like, I think I would like to join you. And I was like, no, you have your own job. I didn't know. And he said, and then he was like, yeah, but it would be so much better because I could do a lot of things that you weren't necessarily good at. And then I started to think
this says a lot about your parenting, because, I don't know a lot of 20-year-olds or even
we'd have
millennials who would say, I want to work with my parent.
Exactly. Well, he had he had worked on a lot of television shows at that point. Mm-hmm. And the year he graduated from college, I was going out on this massive tour with my first Mad Hungry book, and he came with me as a PA kind of thing. So he kind of saw the world, and and enjoyed it. And I mean, I can't speak for him because I don't know how he really feels. Maybe he'd have some really dark tales. But he in January of that year of 16, he said, I did it. I resigned and I'm joining you. And so suddenly, I had a different generation, which was brilliant.
For the social media aspect of
I do all the social media.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
No, because our fans, his peers are now recently married, putting their own kitchens together.
Yeah.
He has a different perspective, but really had an expertise in like operations and trademarks and accounting and that is a very different side than what I do a lot, which is like content creation, ideation, finding tools, knowing why they might work or be something interesting because I've been cooking for 40 years.
Right. So the stuff that you don't necessarily want to do.
Well, the thing is that they're not my core skill set. Let's face it. However, I don't just turn my brains off. Like it's all done.
You have to
I
know.
notice everything. And what became abundantly clear very quickly is to have this, unimpeachable, honest talent around me that had both of our best interest at heart, that had like such a financial brain that I don't have.
Yeah. What's your son's name?
Calder Quinn. We of course you have your growing pains, but we got through it, and the business started in earnest in 15, 16, and here we are. Like we had our 10th year anniversary. There are millions of our tools in the market.
Yeah.
We have started with the wood spurtles, and then people were asking for silicone, which I didn't think I wanted to do, and then I had some prototypes made. And what I noticed, what really sold me, is I was making cookies with a KitchenAid. And you know how you have to, like, if you want to get the dough off, you turn it off and you lift up the paddle and you take your spatula. So I noticed that my spurtle, that silicone spurtle, I could get right under the paddle just like a spatula. I was like,
and it
that's
curves
it.
with
I'm
the
off
bowl.
to business. Curves with the bowl, gets everything out. You don't have to lift it up. And so then I started making different sizes. This is the skinny, but so it's beveled all around the edges, right? But think of all the small mouth things now, like
a jar,
the squeeze bottles of the mustard, and there's a tablespoon or two left in the bottom, and it drives me nuts.
Yes,
you just go right in
to check it out.
So you can go in and you can do everything from like butter to like go in and get that last bit of Nutella off the bottom, because this is all beveled around, so it's like, so this has become this like sleeper hit of a tool. So this is in a lot of our sets, and this is an example of the silicone. But we just kept evolving and we kept making different things. And I told you about being in Brussels and finding a tool, and then that, which was an old baking tool that ended up had a lip and a loop, and not a tool. It was actually like a ceramic piece, which then got me going. And so I made lip and loop colander sets and casseroles, and matched that with like a mid-century design, because I thought that would. I always wanted things that could fit, whether you had some traditional things of your mother's, or you were an eclectic person, or you were a modern person. I want all of our tools to kind of either complement either way. Ours are functional. They're all multi-use. Not one of our tools only does one thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's about living in a New York apartment, having a big family, wanting to economize. Yeah. And so that's our mantra, and that's our tools. And then, I just kept making. And so I also love to travel, because so many of the things that I have found are on my travels. I found that thing in Brussels. Mm-hmm. I found, I call it the hockey stick spurtle. I don't have it here, but I found it I noticed that they were using it in Istanbul. I was in Turkey, and I noticed these women who were cooking using this particular shape, which is basically like the spoon is cut off, so you can so you've got like a traditional, let's say,
like a hockey stick.
Wow. Yeah. So that's just one. Go to Istanbul, have a wonderful time, learn so much stuff. Last day, find that one tool.
This is a trait that a lot of the people from Martha that we've sort of had on a podcast, is that we all have that thing. We have that thing of looking at something and being like, you know what, this could be used for something else.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It really is.
I bet you that is something that I really learned, from my peers.
It not only does this, it does that.
Well, like for instance, today I'm going to Florence, and I am going to an old property, and one of the things they have on the property is a very tiny, like they do in Europe, tiny museum of utility Tuscan tools. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe I'll find something new.
Product development 2026.
That was originally designed for this, and I'm going to make it into this.
I want to talk about mother sauce, and I'm
Yes.
going to hold this up, and you have to sign my book
I
at the
would
end
love
of,
to.
at the end
Thank
of this
you.
podcast. But it was published this year. Do you think it's sort of the full circle of everything that you've sort of been working on? I mean, this is a very personal book, as you
Yeah.
said. You've been working on it a long time, and you put things aside, saving for it.
It's really three things. First of all, I've spent an enormous amount of time writing about the men in my life because that's what my experience was. But I came from this long line of extraordinary immigrant Italian women, which I was able to learn about when they were still alive. Because when I was in college and I was doing film and photography, I interviewed them with I made interviews, took lots of photographs. So I had lots of source material that was just always sitting around. And there was that. There was the fact that I no longer in 2021 was able to just write about any food I wanted to write about. We had a reckoning in the food writing industry, and people who were marginalized, who never really had a chance to write about their own cuisines, had an opportunity. Finally, people like me who might have written about regional Mexico had less opportunity to do so, and rightfully so. I'm all for, I do think that I am just so open to everybody's voice. But it did, no matter what happens, it did limit opportunities for me. Plus, I was aging.
Yeah.
And we were becoming more and more of a youth culture and social media and whatnot. So some of the book ideas that I really wanted to do were not going to be financially viable for me. I wasn't going to be able to get support from my publisher the way I needed to. Right. And so I had gone to a funeral in December of 21. It was my father's sister, and it was the last of a generation of Italian women. And after the funeral, we went to my cousins, and there was like second cousins and great aunts. And I looked around the table. There was about 6 of us women of different ages, and everybody was going on and on about recipes. And then someone looked at me and said, that thing you published, that was my Nana's recipe, not yours. And then said, no, that was my grandmother's. And I looked around and I thought, wow, there's something rich here that is basically an origin story about the women who came here under enormous odds. One of the largest mass migrations in world history between 1870 and the 1920s, 6 million Italians from the Mezzogiorno came to America because they were impoverished. They were looking for a better life. My great-grandmother was amongst those women, and yet when they got here, they all came from their different regions, Puglia, Campania. They got to America, and they were all grouped together as Italians. They brought this incredible skill set that they had developed from cucina povera in Italy, which was basically the cooking of the poor, learning how to extract the most out of the less amount. And that was the bedrock foundation of Italian-American food. But they had no opportunity to really monetize this food back then because they were in the home. You couldn't really go out and get your own job. You didn't have the language. So their husbands and sons and fathers monetized this food. That was the earliest trattorias and so forth, where after the kids went to bed, a couple tables would get set up, and frequently there would be like paying customers come into the living room. We're talking about, 1900s. And I felt like 100 years hence, the most popular foodway in America is Italian-American food. Everybody eats pizza. Everybody eats pasta. It's some of our first foods as a child. And if these women could have imagined 100 years hence that their food would become this colossal foodway, it would be improbable for them to even imagine. So what I did was tell this story, putting the credit back on these women.
I was just thinking that credit where credit's due.
Credit back on these women, and in so doing, took a collection of about 100 iconic Italian-American recipes, and using my skills from my recipe development days, didn't always just use family recipes, but did a selection of like iconic recipes and made them fewest amount of ingredients, maximum amount of taste, and published those as a collection. You know what I'm talking about. Chicken Parmesan, meatballs,
Well, there's one recipe for
that is so
sugo.
Good. Oh, sugo.
You
just opened up to the chicken Vesuvius, which is
beautiful.
Chicago specialty. And I traveled, even though I had my own personal experience. In the back there is a bibliography of about 40 books that I read just to assure that the Italian-American immigrant experience was similar, and it was all across this country. My great-grandfather started a little Salumeria, which is still going in Rome, New York, and so I had the idea to collect all of the continuously operating little Italian stores around the country, filled with lots of stories. And
I love this. I love this recipe.
which one is that?
The tomato sauce sugo, the most
Yes,
basic
yes,
thing to
that's
learn.
my-
I think if anybody needs to learn something, it's that.
Yeah, and restraint is the biggest thing
yeah.
because I discovered as I got older that I didn't want a bunch of different stuff in it. I just wanted it very simple.
Yeah.
And that recipe is the basis for a lot of things. The eggplant parm, the eggplant rollatini. That's the red sauce. That's my master red sauce.
Gravy or sauce?
Gravy really is said by a certain section of Jersey,
Yes.
Pennsylvania.
That's why I asked.
And it's sauce in the rest of the country. But it really is, when you think about Sunday sauce, for instance, or Sunday gravy, you were really utilizing, again, nowadays people would go buy all this beautiful meat, but it was the bits and bobs that weren't purchased that were inexpensive, that took a long time to cook, that had drippings and like gravy.
Yeah.
So it would cook in the sauce, and that would be the Sunday
that's where that
sauce.
comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything kind of leads back to making do. We have so much to learn, and I have a whole section in the front of the book about what our mamas and our nonas taught us about being efficient, being affordable, economizing on time and space, and at the same time bringing basically joy and love and deliciousness to a life, no matter how much money you had.
Well, you also said history informs us, which I love that quote. And the present and the future is what inspires me. And
Yes.
I think that's...
I don't love to. We've talked a lot about what made my career and our careers happen. And I do think that I'm terribly interested in history, and I love to learn from history. But what bubbles me up every single day is the present and the future, and what is happening right now, and who can I learn from, and who can I offer some learning to. Always, constantly. And that's another thing I learned from my husband. He never wanted to live in the past. He was very interested in what was happening now and what he could learn and what could be taught to him. He was just always curious. And I think that's a really important part of aging, is keeping your mind alert.
Yes, absolutely. That said, looking to the future, you actually spoke a little bit about traveling and sort of recording that travel. Is that the next thing?
It's what I'm doing right now, and I just fell into. I wrote an article about a year ago that took place off the coast of Naples on a wooden boat with a handful of women, and it got some traction. And so this year I've been doing travel writing on top of everything else. But what I'm really noticing is how much I love writing as a pursuit, as a solitary pursuit. I love to gather all the information, but after a long time of being like out there, I really value the 2 or 3 hours that I sit down at my desk.
That's solitary kind of.
I love it. And I feel as long as I got my marbles working and physicality working, it's something I can do as I age, which is important because I'm a doer. I mean, some people are, we're all different. And some people get up, they go to their job and they come home and then they do their life. My husband was like that, I'm mostly like, my job is my life is my job 24 hours a day. I can't help it.
I know people sometimes ask, oh, what are you going to do in retirement, Mel? What are they? I'm like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to be doing what I'm doing because I fill that space with the things I love to do.
And yet there are some people that have worked in such a way that when they're retiring, they know exactly what they want to do, which is a relaxation level that is for them. That's the other beautiful thing. There's not one way to be, but you find what works for you and what fills you up. And I know I watched it with my mother in the end of her life. When people are like, oh no, Mom, she might have no, all my mother wanted was to be stimulated creatively.
Yeah.
And as long as that was happening up until the very end, she had something to offer, and that was healthy aging for her.
That's perfect. I could sit here and talk to you forever as usual. But thank you so much for coming on. And you are literally hopping on a plane for this next adventure in Florence.
I'm going to Tuscany, then I'm going to the Dolomites. Which I've never been to. And I'm going with my youngest son. I love the
Dolomites. Big portions, Italian food.
Yeah, there you go.
German portions, Italian food.
I'm taking my youngest son with me, who's 6'4" with a big appetite. So I won't have to it's always helpful to have that. But and it'll be a great experience. But thank you for including me in a creative life, because it's what my life is, and I value so much those of us around us who live it and inspire. So right back at you in terms of being inspired and grateful.
If you want to learn more about our guest today, find links and show notes, visit our website, www.alifecreativepod.com. If you enjoyed the show, please consider following or subscribing, commenting, and giving us a like on whichever platform you're listening on. It really helps us grow our audience. Our producer is Chris Kangas. Our theme music was composed by Pierce McIntyre. And a special thanks to all the amazing people at East 10th House Studio.